you've just found a different way of using your voice. And suddenly everything fell into place and it's been fine.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
What happens when the very gift that defines your life suddenly disappears? For Julie Andrews, the world fell in love with her voice. The soaring notes of Mary Poppins and the sound of music were more than performances. They were the soundtrack of a generation. But in one devastating moment, it was gone. At 89 years old, Julie Andrews has finally opened up about what really happened when she lost her voice. And the truth is even more heartbreaking than fans ever imagined. For decades, the story was told as a simple medical mishap, a surgery that went wrong. Yet behind the headlines was a deeper reality, one of shattered identity, hidden regret, and a confession that changes everything we thought we knew about her. Julie Andrews' story has always sounded like a fairy tale, yet it began with something far more remarkable than luck. Born in 1935 in Walton-on-Thames, England, she grew up during a time of war and scarcity. But even then, her voice stood apart. Family members would recall how she could mimic sounds, sing in perfect pitch, and hold notes that seemed impossible for a child her age. When she was just 10 years old, she was performing with her mother and stepfather, wowing audiences with what critics called a once-in-a-generation talent. Her vocal range stretched across nearly 4 octaves, and the sound she produced was described as crystalline, effortless, and astonishingly precise. People said it was like listening to a finely tuned instrument, one gifted not by man, but by nature itself. As the years passed, Julie's reputation blossomed. She was invited to perform before royalty, and her abilities quickly transcended local acclaim. By the early 1950s, she had made her Broadway debut, and soon she was the talk of the theater world. Her performances in My Fair Lady and Camelot weren't just successes, they were triumphs that set a new standard for musical theater. Andrews became known not only for her perfect voice, but also for her discipline, charm, and the rare ability to project emotion in every note she sang. Then came Hollywood, and with it, immortality. Cast as Mary Poppins in 1964, Julie Andrews enchanted millions around the world with a performance that was both whimsical and technically brilliant. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress, a staggering accomplishment for her very first film. Just 1 year later, she took on the role of Maria in The Sound of Music. The opening scene, Julie's voice soaring through the Austrian hills, remains one of cinema's most unforgettable moments. Her performance didn't just entertain, it comforted, inspired, and became woven into the fabric of global culture. For decades, her name was synonymous with excellence. She wasn't simply admired, she was adored. Families trusted her, children grew up idolizing her, and adults saw her as a symbol of joy, resilience, and class. Her voice was more than a sound. It was a promise of purity and hope in a world that often felt uncertain. Critics and fans alike believed that Julie Andrews' gift was eternal, untouchable, and destined to echo across generations. Yet beneath the glow of her international fame, something far more delicate was unfolding. The very instrument that had carried her to the heights of glory was not invincible. And as the years pressed forward, quiet signs of strain began to emerge. What no one could imagine was just how suddenly and how brutally that gift would one day vanish. By the mid-1990s, Julie Andrews was still celebrated around the world, but behind the applause, something troubling was happening. Years of performing had taken their toll, and doctors discovered non-cancerous nodules on her vocal cords. For many singers, this condition is relatively common and treatable, and Andrews was reassured that a minor procedure could remove the nodules and restore her voice. The surgery was presented as safe, routine, almost risk-free. Believing it was the best option to protect the voice that had defined her life, she agreed. But when the operation took place in 1997, the outcome was nothing short of catastrophic. Instead of restoring her vocal power, the procedure damaged her vocal cords. The voice that had once carried effortlessly through concert halls and theaters was left broken. Gone was the crystalline clarity, the effortless control, the soaring range that had enchanted millions. What remained was a voice that could still speak, but could no longer sing as it once had. In a single moment, the very foundation of her identity seemed to vanish. The initial shock was devastating. Andrews herself later admitted she had believed she would wake up from surgery ready to sing again, only to discover that something irreplaceable had been taken from her. Family, friends, and fans all struggled to understand how such a routine medical procedure could end in tragedy. The press reported it as an unfortunate accident, a mishap no one could have predicted. But for Andrews, the personal cost was immeasurable. What followed was not only grief, but also a battle for justice. In 1999, she filed a malpractice lawsuit against the hospital and the surgeons who had performed the operation, claiming that her voice had been irreparably damaged. The case was settled privately in 2000, but the scars remained. By then, the damage was permanent, and the truth was undeniable. The voice that had defined an era was gone forever. For the public, it was shocking. To imagine Julie Andrews unable to sing felt unthinkable, as if the sun had stopped shining or the mountains themselves had gone silent. Yet the reality was even harsher for her. She wasn't just losing her career, she was losing a part of herself. And this was only the beginning, because while the world thought it understood the tragedy, what came next revealed an even deeper struggle, one that Julie Andrews would keep hidden for years before finally speaking openly about it at 89. When the world first learned that Julie Andrews could no longer sing, there was disbelief. How could one of the greatest voices in history be silenced so suddenly? But for Andrews herself, the reality was far more painful than the headlines suggested. Singing had never been just a profession. It was her identity, her joy, the way she connected with the world. To wake up and find that gift gone was like losing a part of her soul. At first, she clung to hope. Doctors attempted further procedures to repair the damage, and for a brief period it seemed there might be a chance of recovery. But nothing could restore the voice that had once filled theaters with its extraordinary power. Andrews later described it as one of the darkest periods of her life, admitting that she fell into a deep despair, uncertain of who she was without the ability to sing. Still, Julie Andrews was not someone who would allow tragedy to define her completely. Slowly, she began to rebuild. She discovered new creative outlets, diving into writing children's books alongside her daughter, Emma Walton Hamilton. Together, they created a literary partnership that would produce dozens of beloved titles, proving that while her singing voice was gone, her storytelling voice was still very much alive. Hollywood, too, found ways to keep her in the spotlight. Though she could no longer perform as she once had, Andrews reinvented herself. She embraced voice acting, lending her distinctive speaking voice to films such as Shrek and Despicable Me. She also found new on-screen roles that celebrated her grace and wit, like her performance as Queen Clarice Rinaldi in The Princess Diaries. Audiences cheered, grateful to see her again, even in a different form. But beneath the success lay a hidden sorrow. Andrews herself admitted that each time she was asked about singing, a wave of grief returned. She called the loss her greatest disappointment, a reminder that even the most dazzling careers can be shaken by forces beyond control. For fans, it was difficult to watch. The woman who had embodied music itself was now living in a world where she could no longer share her gift. Over the years, whispers and rumors swirled. Some speculated whether she had secretly tried therapies to regain her voice. Others wondered if she ever blamed herself for agreeing to the surgery, or if the pain of losing her talent haunted her more than she let on. Publicly, Andrews remained composed, dignified, and endlessly gracious. But privately, the loss was something she carried every single day. And yet, as heartbreaking as this chapter was, it was not the end of her story. Because decades later, long after the lawsuits and the silence, Julie Andrews would finally open up in a way that shocked even her most devoted admirers, revealing regrets and truths that had never been spoken out loud before. For years, Julie Andrews kept her pain largely private. Whenever she appeared in interviews, she maintained the warmth and poise that had defined her public image. Fans saw the same graceful woman they had adored since Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music. But behind the carefully chosen words, there was an unspoken grief. The truth was that losing her singing voice had left her with regrets that never truly faded. In candid moments, she admitted that the surgery had robbed her not only of her career, but of a part of her identity. She described it as if someone had cut the very heart out of her. Singing had been her way of communicating emotion, her way of telling the world who she was. Without it, she felt as though she had lost her truest form of expression. Andrews once called it her biggest disappointment, a phrase that carried the weight of decades of sorrow. Friends and colleagues noticed the shift as well. While she remained committed to her new projects, writing, acting, mentoring, those closest to her could see the quiet melancholy that would occasionally surface. There were evenings when, in private, she would reflect on what might have been. Could her career have continued into her 70s, even her 80s, had the surgery gone differently? Would she have added more unforgettable performances to her already legendary legacy? Those questions lingered, unanswered, but always present. The regret was not only about her personal loss. Andrews also knew how much her voice had meant to the world. Fans often told her that her songs had shaped their childhoods, carried them through dark times, or connected them to loved ones. To realize she could never give that gift again was heartbreaking. She had spent her life offering joy through music, and suddenly she could not deliver it anymore. Over time, she also began to speak about the emotional toll of living with such a loss. While she never allowed bitterness to consume her, she admitted to struggling with bouts of depression in the years after the surgery. She had to relearn who she was without the one talent that had defined her. Writing books, performing non-singing roles, and lending her speaking voice to film characters helped, but they never fully replaced the magic of her singing. What made these admissions so powerful was how long she had kept them hidden. For decades, the public assumed Julie Andrews had accepted her fate gracefully, moving on without regret. But in truth, she had carried that regret quietly, protecting the world from the depth of her pain. Only much later, at 89, would she finally begin to reveal just how much the loss had haunted her, and how it had shaped the final chapters of her extraordinary life. For decades, Julie Andrews maintained a dignified silence about the full impact of her surgery. She acknowledged the loss, admitted her disappointment, and even pursued legal action, but she rarely allowed the world to see just how deeply she had been wounded. The public saw resilience, grace, and professionalism. What they didn't see was the quiet grief she carried each day. That changed as she approached her 89th birthday, when Andrews finally chose to speak with a rawness that stunned even her most devoted admirers. In candid interviews and heartfelt conversations, she revealed that the loss of her voice was not simply a career-ending event. It was a personal devastation that touched every corner of her life. She admitted that the wound had never fully healed, that her voice had been more than an instrument. It was her identity, her freedom, her joy. Behind the calm, unshakable public image was a woman who had grieved every single day for the gift that had been taken from her. For the first time, she admitted that the damage had pushed her into despair, that she had battled years of depression as she tried to redefine herself without the sound that had made her who she was. Perhaps the most heartbreaking revelation was her belief, at the time, that the surgery was routine. She had trusted her doctors when they assured her it was low risk, almost inconsequential. She walked into that procedure with confidence, never once imagining it could strip her of the very thing that defined her. When the outcome went catastrophically wrong, she was blindsided. Her confession revealed the heavy burden of regret she had carried. Regret not only for the loss itself, but for agreeing to a procedure that silenced her. Even at 89, she admitted that this decision remained the deepest sorrow of her life. And yet, her story did not end there. Andrews explained how the tragedy forced her to reinvent herself in ways she never anticipated. She poured her creativity into writing beloved children's books, embraced acting roles that did not depend on singing, and devoted herself to her family. These pursuits brought joy, but she admitted honestly that nothing could ever replace the power of her singing voice. Fans had long suspected she still ached for what was lost, and at 89, she confirmed it. With disarming honesty, she revealed that she still dreamed of lifting her voice, still longed to feel the resonance of song move through her, even though she knew those days would never return. The confession struck a chord because it was so profoundly human. For most of her career, Julie Andrews had been a symbol of perfection, poised, elegant, untouchable. But here she was, revealing the vulnerability behind the legend. Despite unimaginable success, despite decades of adoration, she still carried heartbreak. It was a reminder that even icons bleed, that behind the polished smiles and endless applause lie struggles no spotlight can erase. Her words reframed her story in the eyes of millions. It was no longer just a tale of a surgery gone wrong. It became a story of resilience, of a woman who endured devastating loss and yet found ways to keep creating, to keep living, to keep inspiring. At 89, Julie Andrews confirmed what many had suspected. The pain never truly disappeared. And by choosing honesty over silence, she gave the world not just a glimpse into her private grief, but also into her extraordinary courage. Julie Andrews' story is not just about a surgery gone wrong. It is about what happens when the very foundation of a person's identity is suddenly stripped away. For decades, audiences saw her as a figure of grace, discipline, and perfection. Yet behind that image was a woman who endured a heartbreak most of us cannot imagine, losing the gift that defined her entire existence. At 89, by finally speaking openly, she turned her personal tragedy into a lesson that reaches far beyond the world of music and film. Her story reminds us of the fragility of talent. No matter how extraordinary, no matter how seemingly untouchable, even the greatest gifts can be lost in an instant. Julie Andrews was a once-in-a-generation voice, yet even she could not escape the vulnerability of being human. This truth resonates deeply because it forces us to consider our own lives. What would happen if the thing we cherish most, the talent or role that gives us purpose, was suddenly gone? Would we have the strength to start over as she did? It also speaks to the courage of reinvention. Andrews could have vanished from the spotlight, retreating in bitterness or sorrow. Instead, she found new ways to express herself. Through writing children's books, acting in roles that celebrated her poise, and lending her voice to beloved animated films, she showed that life after loss is still worth living. Her resilience became an example to anyone who has had to start again after heartbreak. But perhaps the most powerful lesson comes from her honesty. By admitting, after decades of silence, that the loss still haunted her, Andrews revealed that vulnerability does not weaken us. It humanizes us. Fans admired her even more, not less, when she confessed her regrets. Her openness gave permission for others to acknowledge their own pain and to speak about it without shame. In the end, Julie Andrews' journey teaches us that identity is not tied only to what we do, but to who we are. She was a singer, yes, but she was also a storyteller, a mother, a writer, and an inspiration. The loss of her singing voice did not erase her legacy. It expanded it, adding new dimensions of courage, humility, and humanity. And yet, as moving as these lessons are, the most poignant part of her story is not what she overcame, but what she revealed at the very end. That even legends carry regrets, and that sometimes the most powerful voice is not the one we hear in song, but the one that speaks the truth. Julie Andrews' voice was once described as flawless, a gift that seemed eternal. But her story proves that nothing, not even the most remarkable talent, is guaranteed forever. At 89, she admitted the heartbreak that followed her surgery had never fully healed. Yet, instead of letting loss define her, she transformed it into resilience, grace, and a legacy that continues to inspire. Her journey is a reminder for all of us. Greatness is not just measured by what we achieve at our peak, but by how we carry ourselves when life changes everything. Julie Andrews may no longer sing, but her story speaks louder than any note she ever sang. It speaks of courage, honesty, and the power of reinvention. And now, I'd love to hear from you. What part of Julie Andrews' story moves you the most? The brilliance of her prime, the tragedy of her loss, or the courage of her reinvention? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found her journey as inspiring as we did, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe for more stories that uncover the hidden truths behind the legends we thought we knew.